So now that I got your attention with some clickbait, the Duskbloods network test just concluded, and I would like to talk about it because I have played around 8 hours overall, and I have a lot to say, a lot which you might have already heard, but some things you probably haven't yet. So yeah, let's get into it. Now you cannot actually share any gameplay of the network tests, but what you're seeing is not actually me playing, it's just B-roll released by Nintendo, so this is fair play, this is all fair game, okay? Nintendo Ninjas, like, chill out, we're all good here. Anyway, so if I were to do a quick overview of what the game feels like, I would say it feels kind of like Night Rain, but with PvP-focused elements and a very strong Bloodborne-esque aesthetic. And, I mean, simply put, it is just very fun to play. Like, that's the crux of the whole video. If that's all you wanted to come here for, then you're free to click off, because yes, the game is super fun, and I cannot wait for the game to actually come out. So, the actual game, how does it look like? How does it feel like? So first of all, there is 3 game modes. There's a standard game mode, there's a no alliances game mode, and there's duos as well. Now, standard, obviously standard. No alliances means you cannot make any alliances with other players. That is a feature which we'll get more in depth a little bit later. And duos is, well, you pretty much get forced into an alliance. Now, in the network test, you could not queue up with someone that you know. However, they did say that you would be able to do this in the main game. Though I did manage actually to get into a game together, into a duo with my friend, which was super awesome. We were zorking it up together. But yeah, anyway. That's the 3 modes. So if you don't like alliances, you don't have to play them. If you love alliances, you can be forced to play them. And since this is a PvPvE game, well, what does that mean exactly? Well, it is mostly a PvP-centric game. PvP is always active, and you're gonna be doing a lot of PvP. But actually, there's a lot of times where you're just gonna be doing PvE overall. There's not gonna be any PvP, you're not constantly fighting against other players, you're fighting against the environment and exploring the world. And that's actually like the majority of the time you're gonna be spending. And before I get into any details about the game, I would just like to say that this is, of course, a network test. This is not the full game. So whatever I say here, all of these are preliminary thoughts, and obviously once the game comes out, well, then we can talk about proper reviews. This is all just first impressions of what a beta build of the game looks like. So what does the overall game divide into? There's 4 phases in the game. There's phase 1, which is mostly a PvE-centric phase. So in phase 1, you mostly just run around the map, you try to get stronger, and try to get all your kin and all your weapon levels up, but we'll talk about that in detail a little bit later. Then in phase 2 and 3 is where you actually have to start doing some PvP. So how this works, each phase between 1, 2, and 3 is 6 minutes long. And in phase 1 for 6 minutes, you're just running around the map, nothing else really happens. In phase 2 and 3, for the last around 2 minutes, to be exact 135 seconds, on the map there is a ritual site. And again, we'll get into the details of what the ritual sites are later, but this is pretty much the PvP zone. And you kind of have to go there to get enough virtue. Now, what is virtue? Virtue is like the main point system of the game. This is how each player is evaluated on how well they are doing. And in phase 2 and 3 at the end, 2 players will be eliminated from the game. This is an 8-player game, by the way. There's 8 players in one match, and at the end of phases 2 and 3, 2 players will be eliminated. So that leaves phase 4, which is not 6 minutes long. That one is just a final fight, at least in the network test. In the network test, this is a 1v1v1, so a 3 people all-out brawl, with 1 victor who's gonna remain. In the main game, there's apparently going to be more than just this final fight. There's apparently, according to an interview with Miyazaki, gonna be, for example, a big boss fight where you have to co-op with the other players who were left behind to beat a boss, which, I mean, that sounds really interesting to me. I cannot wait to hear what that actually consists of. But yeah, for now, we've seen the PvP final fight. And everyone in this fight has 2 lives. They have 2 lives, they have 2 heals. And yeah, whoever wins, whoever gets left behind is the victor and gets to claim the moon tier. Alright, now let's get into the characters, because there's 6 characters that were available in the network test. The game is gonna have more, allegedly over 10, but we'll see when that comes out. And each of these characters has some of the same things. They all have a melee attack and a ranged attack, and they all also have 2 skills and 2 passives, although the skills and passive are apparently also going to be customizable in the full game. So looking at the characters, here we have the ones that were available to us, starting with Albert, the John Duskbloods, as you may. I liked Albert a lot. This is probably my favorite character from what we had to play with here. So he has a Lorix Jeweled Saber, which is a pretty fast weapon, and a submachine gun, which doesn't do too much damage, but is very good at taking pot shots at long range. And for his skills, he has Bloodblight, which is a medium range attack, which, again, doesn't do too much damage, but feels very nice to just get more hits and more consistently. And then he has Light of Iron, which this one's kind of insane, especially on bosses throughout the game. When you just run around, you try to get stronger, kill some enemies and bosses. This thing just shreds those things. Like, it is really good. It's basically like a Comet Azor, you can imagine. Like a very thin line of Comet Azor, and yeah, the HP just goes down. And then he has 2 aspects, which are the passive skills. First one, additional usage from the start for the Bloodborne skills, which in this case, only these 2, but again, full game customizable, it seems. And increased stagger potential against Bloodborne with high virtue. And stagger is pretty important, but we'll get into that in a second. Next up is Bloodhand Jan. And he also feels kind of like a balanced character, just more of a different way, similar to Albert. Albert just has, it feels like a lot of options. He is also, his weapon is fairly fast, a little slower, and then he has not actually a long-range weapon, but like a mid-range flamethrower coming from his arm. And it's pretty cool. It builds up flame, which is a status effect, which just puts more damage on you if you get afflicted with it. So it's pretty good. It doesn't have a lot of range though, so you really want to close the distance. And his Bloodsworn skills are Blink, which is kind of like a old Hunter's Bone from Bloodborne, or like Bloodhound's Step. Just makes you disappear and have a little bit of a better dodge. As well as Surrender to My Blood. This one was pretty cool, especially when you catch someone unaware. It's just like a massive AoE effect that does a ton of damage, and you can do it also from the sky. So what I really like to do is to jump into the sky, because also each character does have a quadruple jump, a dash and a quadruple jump. So you have a lot of maneuverability around the map and just around the fights overall. And yeah, it feels really good to actually hit. It's kind of easy to avoid once you know it's coming, because he does chance something every time he uses it. So you can tell that he's readying it up. It takes a second to come out, so you can get out of it. But if you do manage to hit it, it feels pretty nice. And then for his aspects, he has counterattacking after receiving damage, restores HP, so a little bit of more healing, and heals HP of spellbound foes, and also boosts attack power. Spellbound foes are pretty much enemies you turn into puppets, which happens when you stagger them and take the riposte. Then we have Trang Long. This is, I would say, I think the weakest character of the ones that I have had to play with here, which I played with all of them. And yeah, she just felt a little bit underwhelming. So she has those circular blades. She can either attack with the melee or she can throw them. Now the throw seems actually pretty good. It doesn't do like a ton of damage, but it seems pretty good. And I think it also counts the same as a melee attack. So I think if you have any status on your weapon, then I think that also counts, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, her skills are Dark Moon, which conceals her, and this is probably pretty good once you actually have specified uses for it, once you actually have predetermined some use. In the network test, I could not really find it that useful, but of course, once we have more of a, you could say, meta developed for the game, then it's probably going to be quite good. And then she has Mamonafa, probably not how you pronounce it, but this is just a giant snake that you summon. You hold the X button, and you summon a snake, which you apparently can control with the L button, though, or the L stick, but I could not really manage to do it properly. Again, this is something that you probably just have to learn how to do properly. But yeah, it did a lot of damage when it actually hit, but sometimes hitting was a little bit difficult. So the damage on her generally felt a little more underwhelming compared to the other characters. But she has some pretty cool skills. So she has Drinking Blood, also spellbinds nearby enemies, which I really like that. So when you take one, when you have like a big mob of enemies and you stagger one, you drink their blood, all of them in the circle, or at least a couple of them in the circle, will also be spellbound for you, which is very nice. It's very smooth, it's very convenient, and it also speeds up farming. And then she has Daughter of the Dark Moon, which hides oneself from distant foes to hinder targeting. I don't exactly know how good that is, but it's something. And then we have Sniper Layla, or like I like to call her, the Bold Corpse. She is kind of insane. Like, this character is a sniper, and she kind of feels like Iron Eye in Night Rain. So, in comparison to all the other characters, where you mostly want to attack with melee, and then, you know, you have your ranged option just to do some more damage, she is like the opposite. Like, your main weapon here is the sniper rifle. And, you know, range attacks usually are not that strong because they are a lot more powerful if you don't have to go up to your enemy. Well, it turns out if you make that range attack pretty powerful, the character is pretty powerful. And yes, the pot shots you can take at people are kind of insane. It's really hard to get away, because if you try to get away, take some positioning, maybe take a heal, oh, you just get sniped. And I had a lot of moments where that exact situation happened, and it was very fun to play. It's very agonizing to play against sometimes. But yeah, definitely a very strong character. And she has 2 skills, Never Vanishing, which is pretty nice. It's a defensive skill where you basically turn into like a swarm of bugs, and you can reposition very easily. So that's pretty nice to take some distance from your foe, again, to snipe them. And she has a Gatling gun. She turns her whole body into a Gatling gun that has, I believe, 60 rounds, and they slowly refill when you're not using it. This, similar to Albert, this just like nukes bosses down, but this is even better towards players, because whereas Albert's, you just kind of have a straight line the whole time, this still follows your enemies, and it spins up for a second, and then it just starts firing and firing. Like, this is actually pretty insane. And then for the aspects, HP is gradually restored to half of max, gold blood stakes restore less than usual. However, this seemed very good, and we'll get to why when we talk about the actual gold blood stakes, which are like the blood vials of this game. But yeah, healing to half of your max HP passively is quite good. And then Night Eye, longer range for lock-ons and observations, that definitely also helps. The long range lock-ons with the sniper, which you can also free aim, by the way. But yeah, this character, very good. Next up, we have Senator Samir Patres, or as I like to call him, Senator Bold Corpse. He is also kind of insane. You can see the Bold Corpse is kind of have a thing going here. What is Miyazaki trying to say with this? Anyway, he has a rapier for his melee attack, which is, it feels a little less powerful than some of the other weapons of the other characters, but it's still pretty good. It attacks quite quickly, and he has a soul bird ring, so he basically sends like a bird from his ring, which you can see over here, and this actually is pretty good. It is limited. Most of the other, like the guns, obviously they have unlimited ammo and you can reload them without any issues. Things like this, and like John's flamethrower, they have pretty much a meter which slowly fills up as you're not using it. Then for his skills, he has Bloodsake, which is really good. It's, you hold the button and a thing on the ground starts following whatever you locked onto. And when you let go, a big spike just comes out of the ground. And yeah, it just impales your foes. It does pretty good damage. It is pretty annoying to fight against. Kind of easy to avoid when you see it coming, but with the chaos that sometimes happens in this game, it is pretty difficult to do. And then the best thing about him is the Saurian form. Like, this dude just turns into a dinosaur. He turns into a dinosaur, he starts chasing you. And when I say start chasing you, like, he will chase you for like a solid 10 seconds before this expires if he doesn't catch anything. And if he does catch you, it does a ton of damage. He like just chomps and chomps you. And he also throws you off the edge, which, especially in the final fight, where there's always like exposed edges you can fall down, that's kind of insane. Like, the damage you can do with this thing if you catch someone is very good. Once you know it's coming, once you take some distance from him, because it also takes a second to charge up, you can pretty easily avoid it. He doesn't have as much maneuverability, but especially in the network test where a lot of players obviously are not going to be great at the game, me included. Yeah, this was a menace. This was a total menace. For his aspects, he has lowers required Bloodsworn skill level, So in this case, he only has these two equipped, but you can use the dinosaur a lot earlier. Normally it's level 12 for all the other characters for the second skill. And he has Unshakable Sword, which is perfect guarding, boosts melee attack power. Very nice. And next up, we have the last character, which is Zork. Everybody loves Zork. I love Zork, you love Zork, everybody loves Zork. So yeah, Zork is a little bit different from all the other characters. He's just a guy, you know, he's just a chill dude, undersea cable, spear gun. He's just raw, man. Like, he's just a goat. He's just Zork. He be Zork in it. So yeah, he's more of a strength-focused character, you could say. He has a slower, harder-hitting hit with his undersea cable. And he has a spear gun, which... This one is a gun, but it does reload over time. You don't like reload it manually. And it does pretty good damage. It has a really long range. And yeah, Zork, I loved Zork. I don't think he's like the best character, but I loved playing as Zork. He's really fun. And his skills, he has a missile. This is actually the second one you get. This is the level 12 skill, which assumes a firing stance and then fires. Yeah, it sounds like you say, like, he just, like, does a stance. He pulls out a missile launcher from his bag, and he just launches missiles into the direction. This is one of those where he shreds bosses. It's really good, especially when you have some other people fighting at mid-distance. And if you just want to, like, interrupt their fight, like, this just cooks. This does a lot of damage if you can actually hit it. Actually hitting it is a little bit difficult, especially at close range. But yeah, it's very fun to use. But what's even more fun to use is the human rocket. Yeah, Zork just kind of propels himself forward. If you've seen in the trailer, he does that. Yeah, he does. He does exactly that. So Zork turns himself into a rocket. It's a little bit of a delay, so he's like flying there in the air, in midair, and then he goes like bam at the enemy. This is super fun. This is super fun to use. It is pretty predictable when you see it. You can't very much time the dodge against opposing Zorks, but it's just so fun, especially when, again, like with Missile, when there's two people fighting. And you just go in from like middle distance into them. Actually happened to me once in one of my games, which I won with Zork actually. I just ran into a guy, I threw him off the ledge on the final fight. It was super funny. But yeah, Zork is the GOAT. He also has Law of the Sea, the defeat Bloodsworn to steal max HP. This is actually pretty annoying if you get defeated by Zork during the game. You just have a permanent HP loss. And this does not stack if the same Zork kills you multiple times, but it's still pretty good. So there's more incentive to actually hunt down players outside of the PvP areas, outside of the ritual zones, if you're playing Zork. And then Dread Resonance, a howl of inhuman sonic wavelength. Hold down the L and ZR, which is the way you howl. We'll get into howling in just a second. But yeah, this basically has a longer howl distance. And there's another thing for each of these characters, which is sigils. Sigils is a thing which was predefined for each of the characters here in the network test, but will be freely choosable in the full release. And what are sigils? Sigils are kind of like a role-play mechanic, you could say. So if you have a sigil equipped on your character, you basically have a side mission that you have to do to earn more virtue. And I really like this. So there's 4 sigils that were in the network test: the Sworn Enemy, Old Friend, Eye of Muralis, and Sigil of Love Ephemeral. So the Sworn Enemy, one player gets tagged as a Sworn Enemy, and you have to hunt them down, and if you do manage to do it, then you get bonus virtue. Old Friend is similar, but instead of hunting them down, you have to find them and make an alliance with them. Sigil of the Eye of Muralis is similar to the Sworn Enemy, except somebody gets marked as a heretic, and you have to use a specific emote, which then reveals, oh, here's the path towards the heretic. And then when you find them, it just shows like, oh, the heretic is nearby. It also shows it for all the other ones. You get like a little notification that, oh, yep, the target that you're trying to find is somewhere nearby. And then there's Law of Ephemeral, which this one is very cool, funny. It seems a lot worse than the others because it's a lot more difficult to actually have executed. I did manage to do it once. So what do? You have to find a player who is your Law of Ephemeral. You have to use an emote, which is, as you can see here, kneeling down and offering a flower to the other player. And they have to accept it. See, that sounds awesome. Now imagine somebody's coming up to you. When you see them, you just try to attack them. Like, realistically, this is a PvP game. Most people will be attacking. Now, the more people will learn how the game actually works, this might become hopefully a bit better, so it's not as difficult. But yeah, I did try to do this once, and I did actually manage to do it. So my Law of Ephemeral was a Zork. and I was chasing him down. The second I saw that he's my lava ephemeral, I chased him down like 5 times. He killed me like 5 times. But on the 6th one, at the very end of the 3rd phase, I did manage to convince him to accept my love. And yeah, it was an awesome moment. I can show it. If there's any B-roll footage of that, I will show it right here. But yeah, it's great. I love it. Alright, next up, let's talk about the general gameplay. So things that each character can do, things that is overall just affected in the gameplay. So first of all, we talked about each character. They have a melee and a range attack, but they also have a shield and a roar. So the shield is self-explanatory. You can hold L and you pull up a shield. It blocks some attacks. If it blocks too much, then it breaks. And then a roar is when you're holding a shield and you click R2, you can do a roar, which kind of acts like a parry. This, I think, will be very powerful. I did not really use it as much against other players, but this builds up the stagger meter by quite a lot. And the stagger meter is very important because as much as your HP, you don't want your HP to go into 0. You do not want your stagger bar to fill to full. So enemies having a stagger bar, self-explanatory. If you fill it, they get staggered. You get a repose. You also have a stagger bar. Players also have a stagger bar, and if that gets filled, you're pretty much dead. Like, the enemy comes up to you, they drink your blood, it's over. You're dead. From my experience, I don't know if it's actually an insta-kill or if you can actually survive it. From my experience, the moment that happens, you're dead. And that's bad for multiple reasons. First of all, you're dead. That's a pretty big one. Second one, in the final battle, where healing is more limited than outside of it. If they get to repose you like this, they also heal a little bit back. So yeah, you probably want to avoid this and you want to watch it. And it goes down if you don't take damage for a bit, which this is where the range attacks are actually very good, especially on Albert. I really like taking little pot shots from a distance. So I don't do much damage, but I still keep the stagger bar up. Even if they get to heal, I'm still keeping the stagger high. And what happens when you stagger enemies? Well, there is a special thing. You turn them into puppets. Which are permanently now your little gremlins to control, like a vampire. This is pretty good, especially early on when you're not as powerful yet and you try to fight bosses. Getting things that can take away their attention to let you focus on the actual boss and on dealing damage is very good. Okay, next up we have the healing system, which is you have blood vials that are called gold blood stakes. Now you start with 2. You always start with 2. If you die and you respawn with 2. But if you have more than 2, then you keep whatever you had before. You gain these vials by filling a bar above it, and you can do that by either killing enemies or picking up gold blood, which is just like pickups you can find on the floor. Now this is actually something I sort of disliked, and especially when combined with the ritual sites and the PvP zones. So as I mentioned, if you have more than 2 gold blood stakes on you, so even if you die, you do get to keep them, you don't lose them, which I think is great, because then you never feel like you're actually losing any resources that you built up. The problem is, it can kind of feel like it's better to die than to heal, and I don't really like that. Because obviously you would want to keep your resources for the most important part of the phase, which is the ritual site. So during the actual phase where you're running around and just trying to beat some enemies, get stronger, it just feels almost wasteful to use them. And I don't really like the feeling of that. I would prefer if they made or forced you in a way to go back to 2 blood vials once you enter the ritual site. And there is also already a system where exiting the ritual site makes you lose HP. So I think that's something that maybe should have been adjusted because, yeah, it just feels a little weird to be healing up. It almost feels like you're wasting your resources. Alright, now let's talk about the map, because the map is not very big actually, but it is very vertical. So much so that sometimes you can look at the map and you can have a ritual site on a place on the map. You go there and it's not there. Why is it not there? Well, because it's right below. This happened a couple times before I realized. But yeah, the map is pretty heavily packed with content. There's a bunch of stuff. Wherever you go, you're probably going to find something. And you can actually fast travel as well, which is a cool feature in the multiplayer game. So traversing the map is pretty easy and pretty fast. And there's also regions in the map. So there's a couple regions, and in each of the regions are different things. These what thing is there changes by the phase. So you can have either weapon upgrades, which there's an iron affinity, which strengthens just your damage of the weapon, or there's other affinities like fire, lightning, and poison. And these add a status effect to your weapon, which obviously you can inflict on enemies. Fire does a pretty fast damage over time effect, on the target, lightning interrupts the target, and poison puts a little poison effect, which lasts longer than fire but does a lot less damage. Then you also have skill upgrades. So you have these little blood sacks. These are the little enemies, the kind of Titanite demons of this game, where you find them, you hunt them down, and once you do, you get to choose a skill upgrade, one of two, and that's how you upgrade your skills. There's also Obtain Flame of Virtue, which Flame of Virtue is a way to get virtue. It's basically like a guy in a chair, and the first player to interact with this gets a couple virtue, which is pretty good. And there's also Kin Enhancement, which enhances your kin. Now you may be asking, what is a kin? Well, a kin is like your little buddy, your spirit summon from Elden Ring almost. Now these are one of the most important features of the game. So these are basically like spirit summons from Elden Ring. You just have like a little helper that you have, and there's different types. So you get them by going to this big stake of light, and there's like a circle there, you interact with it, and you pull out a kin from that. Now there's 3 types of these circles. There's the ring, blade, and eye, and each of these gives you a different kin. But there's of course even more kin inside of these categories. So these have different effects depending on which one you get. There's one which was completely insane. It's like a big chungus guy in a wheelchair. Like, this dude was absurd. He can like rush up to you, he can grab you. This guy was crazy. There's one, the gargoyle, which is more of a passive heal effect. I don't think she did any damage. I think she was just sitting there and healing you, which is okay, I would say. They definitely differ in power and what they do. But yeah, you're gonna have a lot more choice of how you want to play, of how you want to build up your game plan. So yeah, kin are very important. And then there's another event that happens between, or can happen between each phase of the game. So these are unveiled at the beginning of a phase. They don't happen every time, but they add some unique aspect to that current phase. So the ones that were available in the network test are the Zeppelin, which everybody gets a transmitter. You can pretty much call the Zeppelin and it just rains fire from above, which is very funny and very fun. And you have a Bloodsack Gala, which just makes a lot of Bloodsack spawn, so it's really easy to get your skill level up. There's a Shuffling Storm, which is actually indicated on the clock in the top right, so you can see when it's going to happen, and when it does happen, it pretty much teleports players into random places. Alright, next up let's talk about Virtue, because this is the main scoring system of the game. So there's different types of virtue, and all the types don't necessarily matter. The types just determine how the virtue is accumulated, but what counts is your total virtue, how much you have overall. So looking at the virtue that you can collect during the more PvE phases, there is Repulsion Virtue, which you get by defeating mini-bosses and bosses, or as they're called, Trespassers here, which we'll get into in a second. There's Flame Virtue, which we already talked about. That's the one where the guy is sitting in a chair, you light the chair, you get a little bit of virtue. There is Commendation Virtue, which is actually not permanent virtue. All of the other ones are pretty much permanent. Once you get them, you get to keep them. This one is evaluated every minute of a phase. And every minute, the game pretty much checks who has the most kills and who has the most items collected. And then there are 2 commendations for this. There's the Bloodfang Commendation, which is for the kills, and there's a Collector Commendation, which is for the items. Now, I believe the top 2 players in each of these commendations get some bonus virtue for this. But if you happen to drop out of that ranking, if you go down to 3rd place, well, you start losing virtue. You start losing the virtue that you actually got before. And it's not added iteratively. Like, there's just a constant value that somebody is going to have. And if they fall out of the ranking, well, they lose it. And of course, you also get some bonus virtue if you complete the Sigil quest, for example. There's a bunch of different other ways to get what is called other virtue, basically through other events. And then there's also 2 other types of virtue. There's the Sword Virtue and there's the Pledge Virtue. You get these at ritual sites. So to get more into detail on what ritual sites are, because as I said, these are the designed PvP zones. So when you kill players in this zone, you get virtue. You get the Sword Virtue specifically. That's the virtue you get for kills inside the ritual zone. There's also Pledge Virtue. Now, Pledge Virtue, basically in the ritual sites, there are these blood pledge pillars that kind of act like a control point in a way. So how this works is you get up to the control point, you hold the button for 5 seconds on new ones, on unclaimed ones, and 8 seconds actually on ones that are already owned by other players currently. So you can overwrite their pledge to it. And once you own that control point, once you own that blood pledge, then you get some virtue for it. But if other players come and they take away the pledge pillar from you, then you lose the virtue which you initially gained. And there are also two more important things inside the ritual sites, which are the red stones and the gold stones. Now, this is something you probably want to go in first once you enter the ritual site. So what they do is they pretty much amplify how much virtue you get for either killing other players or taking the pledges. So the red stone gives you more virtue for kills you get, while the gold stone gives you more virtue for the pledges you get. Now this seems to double the overall amount of virtue you get from these actions, so they are pretty impactful and you probably want to commit to one of these early and try to get as much virtue as possible like that. Also additionally, if you're in an alliance, this is where you share virtue. This is the only place where you actually share virtue. Normally in alliances, you don't share any XP, you don't really want to be next to each other. But inside the ritual sites, you do share the virtue which you get. But it is shared evenly between the players. So if you kill a player, if you were to get 12 virtue, well now each of you gets 6. So it is an advantage, but it's also in a way a disadvantage. So it's very balanced, it doesn't force you into making an alliance every game. Alright, and the last thing I want to talk about the gameplay are the mini-bosses and the trespassers. So the mini-bosses are basically all around the map. You can find a lot of them. There's 3 types of them, at least in the network test. There's like a Black Panther, there's like a Bloodborne Beast Man kind of thing, and there's a Nikke, which actually had multiple variations. So defeating these mini-bosses gives you some virtue, and it also gives you a passive skill. You can have up to 5 passive skills enabled at a single time. You can collect more, but you can swap them out. These are pretty cool. I like the mini-bosses. They weren't too difficult, except for the Nikke sometimes. They have some insane moves, honestly. But yeah, these are pretty cool. They don't take too long, especially once you're more leveled up. And they can only be fought by one player at a time. So whoever gets the last hit pretty much takes the entire cake. But then we have trespassers. Now, these are different. These are not fought by one player. These are big, powerful bosses. There were also 3 types in the network test. There was Vampire, who, yeah, it's like a vampire. There was the frog with big naturals we saw in the trailer. And there was like a Lady Maria riding on a headless horse, which also came in different weapon variations. So the bosses are very cool, but here's the thing. You don't fight these alone. You pretty much have to fight these with other players. So once you initiate a fight with one of these trespassers, with one of these bosses, a co-op request gets sent to pretty much all of the players around. And they can hold the minus button, they can accept, they can join in on the fight. Now this is one of the things I also did not completely like. So how it works, if you are in the fight and if the boss gets defeated, then everybody who was around to fight, no matter what you did, as long as you were inside the fight, you get virtue and you get a passive skill. If at any point of the fight you die, well then you get sent out of the fight. You can teleport next to it, you can come join the fight back. But if the boss happens to be defeated in the meantime, which didn't actually happen to me personally, but I assume you don't get any of the benefits. And that creates kind of a weird dynamic here. Because technically it is optimal to come join the fight, but not actually fight the boss. And I don't really like the way that's being implemented. I wish this was more like a raid boss, where rewards are distributed based on how much damage you did, for example, or maybe some other ways of evaluating your performance in the fight. And also, if the boss is not actually successfully killed, then, well, everyone here just wasted a lot of time, and it just feels like you're being punished for doing poorly instead of being rewarded for doing well. And I don't really like how this is currently implemented. So I hope this is something they touch up a bit in the full release. So basically, if the fight is successful, you want to be there and you want to kill the boss because it gives a lot of virtue to everyone. But if it's unsuccessful, well, you just wasted a lot of time. And technically this could make up some strategies, like if you're the highest virtue player, you could go initiate a fight and immediately leave. And then if they're unsuccessful, well, you just made up a massive lead. It's just something that personally I don't really like. I feel like you should be more rewarded for doing well at the boss, but we'll see when the full game releases. Anyway, the final thing I would want to touch up on is visuals, audio, and performance. So the visuals, of course, this is FromSoftware. Like, there's not much to talk about here. It's phenomenal. The game looks absolutely glorious. The music is great, especially the final battle OST is absolutely insane. But this is a Switch 2 exclusive. And Switch 2 is not the most powerful console. And so, despite the game overall, from a point of art direction, it looks phenomenal, it looks great. Graphically, it is a bit weak. And I don't mean it how it doesn't have like ray tracing and whatnot. It's just the game looks quite blurry. It is quite noticeable that there are being some corners cut here to make the game run pretty smoothly. But overall, I would say it is acceptable. At least if the game performed very smoothly with constant 60 FPS. Now, performance-wise, it is okay, I would say. Like, if this was a port of a single-player game, and it was ported to the Switch too, I would say this is okay performance. However, for a fast-paced game like this, I think it is a little bit underwhelming. So I don't have exact counts throughout the whole play session that I did, but generally I found the game to be running at around 45 FPS. And again, this is a very fast-paced game, so it did feel a little bit lacking, and I hope they get to squeeze out a little bit more performance before the final release. It wasn't anything too egregious, I didn't have any actual freezes or massive frame drops, but it did feel very noticeable that the game is lagging behind at times. And speaking of lagging, that's one thing it actually did not do. From a network perspective, and again, this is the network test, from just playing the game normally, it felt very good. Like, you could notice sometimes there was a little bit of delay, like sometimes you would look at the clock and it would just like skip a second maybe, but just in combat, in actual gameplay, the game was very much fine. There were a couple times where the game seemed to freeze, especially at the end of a phase. This happened to me twice, where it had to take a second to get the next phase started, but again, network test, this is what it's here for. Besides that, the only thing I really had trouble with was getting into a game. A lot of the time it would create a match, connect to a match, and then it would just go like, oh, network error. Again, network test, that's what it's here for. But yeah, overall, game looks great, runs okay. For the Switch 2, it's acceptable, I would say. I do hope they get it better. But yeah, for some closing thoughts, I'm super excited for the game. I cannot wait for the game to come out. I played like 8 hours. On the last day, I literally woke up at 6 AM just to play a little bit more. So yeah, the game is super fun, and I can't wait to play it. Alright, so that's it from me. If you have any questions, leave them down in the description. I would be glad to answer them. And yeah. See you next time. Bye bye.